mistake I did learning all this. So here also something similar. Because he was Kalabhashini, or because he was speaking in broken language, he was walking like that. So his father became very much attached. And then it's mentioned Nirikshamanas Tal Leelam. Of course, here when it's this specific word of Leela is used, it's not used for the pastimes of the Lord. But Leela means the pastimes or the activities, we can say in simple words, the activities of that child. And just by that activities, Mumude Jaratha Bhrisham. This person, Jaratha means old age. We say Janma Mitru Jara Vyadhi. That is, Janma is birth, death, old age, and disease. And this person, Ajamil, was in his old age. That's why it's mentioned Jaratho Bhrisham. Even in his old age, because of this child's broken language, because of this child's activities, he was very much attached. So now we see, or this purport also speaks about this attachment to the family life, and also at the end it glorifies the holy name of the Lord. So when we talk of this attachment, let's try to understand the different attachments that are there. Or we speak about the material attachment that is there. We also speak about spiritual attachment, which is favorable for devotional service. So we see something similar which is being described by Prahlad Maharaj. So Prahlad Maharaj also in his teachings to his demoniac schoolmates, when he started preaching, when he was in the Gurukul and all his schoolmates were there, they were inviting him for playing. And that time he gives a clear description of the human life, gives a clear description of the duration of the human life, the time a person has in his life, and how he wastes his life in different aspects. So Prahlad Maharaj in that shloka, in one of the shlokas, he says that every human being has a maximum duration of 100 years. And of course, we understand this is, in this age, even that is not there, even the duration has reduced even further. But he describes an ideal case that a person has maximum duration of 100 years. But for a person who cannot control his senses, he just ends up wasting the entire time. Here, Ajamil was at that time, even though Ajamil was a trained up Brahmana, at one point of his life, even the Acharyas or the Shukdev Goswami glorifies some of his characteristics. That he was Shuta Sampanna, he was well read, well versed in Vedic scriptures, he was very controlled, and all those things were there. But because of this association of prostitute, because of engaging with her, he lost all his good qualities, he lost all his Brahminical qualities. And that's why at this point, he also was out of his control, or his senses were not under control. So Prahlad Maharaj says that for a person who cannot control his senses, even though he may have 100 years to live, half of that life is completely, or half of these years are completely lost. How they are lost? He says at night they sleep for 12 hours being covered by ignorance. This is how Prabhupada translates that being covered by ignorance, the person sleeps for 12 hours. And that's why for a person whose senses are uncontrolled, his half of his life is just lost in ignorance. Because sleep just means ignorance, or even in a sleep, a person might be dreaming something, but it's actually illusion. There's no point, or there's no relevance of it as such. So then he further says, or then he further gives the description that, okay, someone may say 50 years are lost. What about the remaining 50 years? And Prahlad Maharaj breaks that down even further. He says about the childhood, that how the person loses 10 years or initial 10 years just in some activities, frivolous activities which have no sense. He's just bewildered, so he loses the 10 years of his life like that. Then he speaks about the last 20 years of the person's life, and the person is old, as Ajamil was also old. And the person becomes very anxious. And that's why the last 20 years he just wastes in anxiety, not able to do any kind of material activity. And even he says the another 10 years of his boyhood he wastes in playing and sporting and many other activities. So like that, he describes the majority of the life of a person, the person wastes in these frivolous activities who cannot control his senses. And then what about the remaining part? So we discussed about the young age, the childhood. We discussed about the old age. Now let's discuss the middle part of what happens in the middle section of his life. And that's what Prahlad Maharaj describes about the family life. So he says the shloka, Durapurena kamena mohena cha baliyasa shesham griheshu saktasya pramatyasya payatihi. Because someone may say that Prahlad Maharaj spoke about the 50 years being wasted in sleep, he spoke about the childhood, he spoke about the old age. But then someone may say we can use the middle part of the life, that is the best part of the life. Then here Prahlad Maharaj is saying even that portion of life for one person who is griheshu saktasya or who is attached to family life, even that part is wasted. He says duraparana kamena, that a person whose calm or whose senses are uncontrolled, whose lusty desires are increasing more and more, for such a person, even that part of life of the graham or the graha part of life, the family life, is also wasted. How it is wasted? Shesham means the remaining part, griheshu saktasya pramatyasya payatihi. Because he's illusioned, he just wastes that part of life and he does not engage in devotional service altogether. Because Prahlad Maharaj, prior to that, in few shlokas, he speaks about the importance of devotional service, that how a person has to practice devotional service right from childhood. And then his schoolmates might be asking this question that what about we can practice that later also, now we have lot of time. So that's why he's clarifying this, that no time or the person does not get any time for devotional service. A person whose mind and senses are out of control. Now, another thing further he says about this, he says that for a grahamedi or a person who is attached to family life, he says, Ko griheshu puman saktam atmanam ajitendriya. So he says for this person or such a person who is griheshu, who is attached to family life, puman saktam atmanam ajitendriya, and other symptoms of that person are ajitendriya. So jitendriya means one who controls his senses, one who is victorious over his senses. And ajitendriya means one who cannot control his senses. So he says for such a person who is too much attached to household life, who cannot control his senses, then he says what is the hope for such person to get liberated? Or how can such person get out of this entanglement of cycle of birth and death? And then he says, Sneha pashar didir baddham utsaheta vimochitam. Sneha pashar, that sneha pashar, or the tie of affection that is there, that binds the heart of the person. And that is a very, very strong tie that is there. And because of that, there is no hope for such a person to break the cycle of birth and death. So similar thing we see here, the Ajamal's attachment towards his family life, and Prahlad Maharaj is also describing something similar. That how for such a person who is attached to this sneha or who is attached to this sneha pasha or the rope of affection that is there, for such a person there is no hope. Now this verse, specifically this line, sneha pasha didir baddham, we know there is another personality who speaks something similar and who prays to the Lord that please remove this sneha pasha. We know the prayers, amazing prayers of Kunti Maharani. So even though we understand Kunti Maharani was a liberated soul, she was a pure devotee of the Lord, but she was also praying something, and she was praying just to remove this Sneha Pasha. Here Prahlad Maharaj is describing how strong this Sneha Pasha is, and in the case of Ajamil, it's clearly evident that how he, even in the old age, was attached to the small child, not taking forward to the next ashrama of Vanaprastha or something. He was just attached to that family life. And that's why we see devotees like Kunti Maharani, they pray to the Lord. And what they pray, this very famous prayer, Atha Vishwesha Vishwatma, Vishwamurte Sokeshu me, Sneha Pasham Imam Chindi, Dridam Pandushu Vrishnishu. So what she is saying, she is praying to the Supreme Lord, Vishwa Isha, the Lord of the entire universe, controller of the entire universe, Vishwa Atman, the supreme soul of the entire universe. And what she is praying, she is praying, Sneha Pasham Imam Chindi. That Chindi means cut down. That remove, or this Sneha Pasha, or the rope of affection, please cut down this rope of affection. Now the question may be asked, who was she attached to? She was only attached to the Pandavas, and she was attached to the Vrishnis. Vrishnis means the dynasty of Yadu, or the dynasty of Krishna, the relatives who were there. Now in one sense, they were all devotees. The Pandavas were all devotees, and these people were also devotees. But here Kunti Maharani is praying that Sneha Pasha, Iman Chidi, even that kind of attachment, not the kind of attachment to devotees, but Prabhupada explains there that the material attachment a person has because of the so-called relatives and the family members. So she was praying to the Lord that please remove that attachment. Prabhupada writes that it is natural for a family person, and it is natural for a person in general to be attached to these aspects or to the family members, to take care of them. And that's why Kunti Maharani is praying like that please cut off this tie of attachment so that I can put my mind completely in you. And there Prabhupada writes a very nice purport. He says, To free ourselves from the cycle of birth and death, one must be liberated from material bondage. So Prabhupada writes in this prayer of Kunti Maharani that if someone wants to get free from the cycle of birth and death, then he must be liberated from material bondage. And he writes how he will, or what is the most important thing in that material bondage. Prabhupada writes, and especially from household life. So he specifically speaks about that in material bondage also the most strongest bondage is this household life. And then he writes, household life is actually a kind of license for a materially attached person by which to enjoy sense gratification under regulative principles. We all know in our Varnashrama Dharma, we speak about the different kinds of karmas that are there, the different kind of activities that are there. We talk about the Nitya Karma or something which has to be done on a regular basis by every person. Then we speak about the Naimittika Karma, the occasional activities that are there. And then there is something called as Kamya Karma, something which is not important but which is just allowed or the regulation is given to it. Or basically something which is not necessary for a person to do, but a person who cannot withhold, then he is given license, okay, you can do. And here Prabhupada writes that this household life is also kind of license for a person who is materially attached. Or for a person who cannot enjoy or cannot stay without sense gratification, then this license is given. And then Prabhupada further says, otherwise there is no need of entering household life. And he's writing this in the purport of Kunti Maharani, in the verse of Kunti Maharani, where she's praying to the Lord. He speaks about this thing or this aspect, that how in this material bondage, the most strongest aspect which bounds a person is this household life. And whomever that be it the case of Ajamil, be it the case of so many other personalities in the Bhagavatam only we know, in all the cases, the person gets bound by it. And that's why, as Prabhupada says, for a person who can control himself or who is not that materially attached, there is no need for him to enter household life. And then Prabhupada says something further. He says that every person requires training. Or he says training is needed living under the care of Guru. As we know in the previous times, how the person used to be trained up in family or trained up in the brahmachari life, or what we call as the actual brahmachari age that was there when a person in his childhood, he was put in the Gurukul. And right from that age, right from the age of 7 or whenever he was put, he used to be trained up in the brahmachari life, or he used to be trained, or what it means for brahmachari life means trained up in the control of mind and senses. And for such a person who gets trained up, who is trained up, who is trained to control his mind and senses, who is trained in the various aspects of devotional service, then after when he used to pass out from the Gurukul, then he had the choice. Then he used to be given a choice that whether he wants to enter Grahastha ashram or whether he wants to enter Brahmachari ashram. But Prabhupada writes, whichever ashram at least he'll maintain or he'll follow, he'll be a Brahmachari. Even if he enters Grahastha ashram, he'll follow the principles of a Brahmachari. So the aspect that is most important is the aspect of training. And without being trained up in these aspects of controlling the mind and senses, even if a person enters household life or the person enters so-called household life, naturally he'll be entangled. Because we saw the case of Ajamil where he was trained up, but naturally he fell down from his position and he was out of control, or his senses were out of control. Then we understand how risky it is for a person who does not receive this training or does not get trained up at any point in his life. And without training, he enters household life, so how dangerous it will be. Or he'll be just more and more entangled in the family life that is there. And then here it's mentioned, or Prabhupada writes in the purport, even though the person may realize that he should worship Krishna, he is unable to do so. Therefore, from the Kaumara age, one should begin worshipping the Lord. So here he is mentioning one more aspect, that even in such a person who is entangled in such a way, even at one point he realizes I need to worship the Lord, or this is my real duty, but he is not able to do so. And why he is not able to do? Because there is no training. And we see many times recently when we were there in Mayapur, there was a person who was driving us and he was telling that I'm born in a Vaishnav family, I'm born in a family where everyone practices devotional service, but due to some or the other reasons, I'm not able to do. And I feel the regret for it, but I'm not able to do due to whatever, or some reasons that were there. So the point, and Prabhupada writes a similar thing here, that a person understands, he knows that he has to practice devotional service, he's born up in that atmosphere, but still he's unable to do so if he has not trained right from the very beginning. And in such a person just becomes entangled more and more in family life. And then he further writes, one can perfect one's worship only by producing attachment to worship and by being unattached to anything else. So just by practicing from Kaumar age, from the young age, just by practicing devotional service, worshipping the Lord, that is the only way of engaging or increasing our attachment towards the Lord. There is no other way. If a person says artificially at later point in his life he'll develop attachment, or when old age will come he'll develop attachment, it's clearly mentioned it's not possible. Right from the young age, as Prahlad Maharaj is instructing to his schoolmates, the training is needed, and only then the person can develop that attachment. And further, he speaks something very interesting. He speaks about another aspect. Now we are talking about this Bhaddra Hridaya, or we are talking about the aspects of attachment, or what are the things that a person becomes attached in this world, in this material world, which blocks his path of spiritual life. And one thing we already discussed, that is the family life, or that is the household life that is there. And Prahlad Maharaj speaks about few other aspects which are expansions of this family life to which a person also becomes attached. And he speaks about artha. He speaks, Kona artha trishnam visrajet pranebhyopi ya ipsita. So this line, Prabhupada gives a very nice translation of this line. He says, money is so dear that one conceives of money as being sweeter than honey. And then he says, therefore, who can give up the desire to accumulate money, especially in household life? So then he speaks about, Prabhupada speaks about the expansions that are there. First, a person becomes more and more entangled in this family life, in this household life. And then there are some expansions, a person becomes attached to accumulating money. And for various reasons. Reasons may be dharmic, for taking care of the family, for maintaining the dependence. And reasons may be adharmic also. But a person becomes attached. Here we know in the case of Ajamel also something similar happened. When he became attached to this prostitute just to maintain her, as we discussed in the previous shlokas, he gave up all his dharmic life. He started engaging in begging and then borrowing. And if that even didn't work, then he started stealing or plundering the house of other people who were there. And that's what Prahlad Maharaj says, that a person is ready to do anything. He speaks in this shloka, Yam krinati asubhi preshtas taskara sevako vanik. Means he says the person is ready to do anything, even risk his own life, just for this aspect of artha, or just to get some money in his life. He gives three examples. He gives the examples of thieves, soldiers, and merchants. Just like thieves who are there, who are ready to steal the house of some person, rich person, even at the risk that if the rich person finds out, he might shoot them, or the person might kill them. But still they are able to take their risk. And another example Prahlad Maharaj gives of soldiers. Or Prabhupada explains that it's soldiers, but actually in the past it's all of the king's servants who were there, who used to be ready to do anything for the king's service, and just even ready to give their own lives for the king's service. And what they are getting in return? They are getting this artha, or they are getting money in return. And same with professional merchants who go on ships for a voyage for big times, just for this money. And that's why Prahlad Maharaj says, therefore, who can give up the desire to accumulate money, and especially in household life? And even further he says that this money or this artha is like a bahya pran. That one is the pran we understand according to Ayurveda, the pran or the life air that is inside our body. And the another pran that is there, or the bahya pran, is this artha that is there, money that is there. That even a person, even if something happens to him, he's not that much more bothered, but his money is stolen or his money is taken away, the person loses, it's like person loses his life completely. That's how the person, or that's how much the person is attached to his family, or attached to this money, which is the expansion of this, again, the household life. So these are the various aspects which Prahlad Maharaj describes, that how a person in the family life, his heart becomes more and more bound. He speaks about artha, he speaks about the family or the different family relatives that are there. And then he describes it more and more vividly. He says that how can a person who is most affectionate to his family, the core of his heart being always filled with their pictures, give up their association? Now the point that is mentioned is filled with the pictures or the memories, or as it's in this verse, it's mentioned the Leela, that as Ajamel was remembering the Leela of his child. And same way for a person who is completely engrossed in family life, only those Leelas or those activities which he does with those people, that is what the person will remember. That is what will always be played in the core of his heart. And for such a person, even to give up that association will be very difficult. And many times it so happens, even if a person artificially imitates, he gives up that association, but inside he's always thinking about them. That's Prabhupada describes in various ways about the Markat Vairagya, or the person who takes renunciation, but inside is always thinking about his family, or always thinking about his home. Because that's a but obvious thing. When a person spends so much time in this household life, naturally a person becomes attached and his heart becomes filled with their pictures, as Prabhupada says, or as Prahlad Maharaj says. And now he speaks something, especially in the household life about the wife. He speaks, Katham Priyaya Anukampitaya Sangam Rahasyam Ruchiransta Mantra. Katham Priyaya means that Priyaya is that the most beloved object in the family life, and that is the wife. He says Anukampitaya, and why she is most beloved? Because of two reasons. Anukampitaya and Sangam Rahasya Ruchiramscha Mantra. Why she is the beloved object? Because she pleases the husband in various ways. Anukampitaya means because she is always very kind and very sympathetic, always taking care of the husband. And second thing, Sangam Rahasyam Ruchirams means always pleases her husband in various ways. So he describes further, gives a more vivid description of this household life, that what are the objects, what are the sense objects in this household life, objects of attachment in this household life, and how they serve the person, and the person becomes more and more attached. And there also he speaks about something similar. He speaks, Suhitsu tat sneha sita shishunam kalaksharanam anurakta chitta. So here in this verse also, this term that was used was kalabhashini. Kalabhashini means broken language, and in that verse Prahlad Maharaj also says kalaksharanam anurakta chitta. So this is a common theme which is used at multiple places in Bhagavatam. Kalaksharanam, again the same thing. When the child speaks that broken language or those broken words, that leads to anurakta chitta, or the person becomes more and more attached to such a child, or in such a family. And that's why it's mentioned, when these things are happening, when the wife is serving in various ways, when the small children are speaking in pleasing or in these broken tones, which is very pleasing to the father, the person becomes more and more attached, and for such a person to give up this such association is next to impossible. A person cannot give up this association at all. So Prahlad Maharaj gives a vivid description of this entire aspect. He gives a very vivid description of the family life and of the further expansions of the family life. And he explains that how a person who entangles in that without any training, who goes into this family life, then for such a person there is no hope, or he cannot give up their association. Now Prahlad Maharaj speaks something further. He also speaks about the other expansion or the other relatives that are there. He says, Putram smaram sta duhitra hridaya bhratram swasra va pitarau chadinav. So now he's speaking about the other things that are there. The Putran Smarams means the elderly parents who are there. So now we were speaking about the wife and the children, and who are the other components, who are the other entities in a family life. So he speaks about the elderly parents who are there. Then he speaks about the sons and daughters who are there, and he says that these are also very, very dear to the heart. And amongst all this, who is that personality who is most dear? So Prahlad Maharaj says a daughter is very dear to the heart of the father. And that is a natural mentality that is seen, that son is dear to the heart of the mother and the daughter is very dear to the heart of the father. And he says that while living at her husband's house, she is always in his mind. So even if the daughter is married, she goes away and lives in the husband out, but still the father is very much attached. He's always thinking about her. And who all are there? Then he speaks about these are the living entities or the sense objects that were there. Then Prahlad Maharaj gives a vivid description of the different items in family life. He says, Grihan manogyoru parichadam cha vrittishcha kulaya pashu bhritya varga. Now he's speaking about the different elements or the items that are there in the family life. What are there? The furniture that is there, or the wooden furniture, whatever furniture that is there, that also becomes an object of attachment. And a person doesn't want to give that up. Cha kulya pashu bhritya vargan. And what else? Pashu is the animals. So of course, nowadays people don't keep much animals, or they keep these dogs and cats. But in the past, it was mainly the cows which were kept. To Pashu, that also becomes, or a person becomes attached to even that. What else? Bhritya means the servants. So in a family life, we see so many expansions are there just from the wife, then the son, the daughters, then the elderly parents, then becoming attached to the money that is there, then becoming attached to the household items that are there, the servants who are there, the animals that are there in the house. And Prahlad Maharaj says, who could give up such comfort? So what is the hope for such a person? First of all, a person who is entering family life, there is no training for him. As Prabhupada writes, he is not being trained up in the Gurukul system to control his mind and senses. And then he enters this trap, which Prahlad Maharaj himself says is like Graham Andhakupam. He enters this dark well. And then for such a person, there is no hope. For such a person who develops all these kinds of attachment, then there is no hope for him to get out. And he gives the example of such a person, he compares him to a silkworm. Or this is an example given by Prahlad Maharaj himself, who compares such a householder or such a person who enters into family life just like a silkworm. So he says, just like a silkworm builds a cocoon for himself, but he's so foolish that he builds the cocoon, but he does not know how to come out of it. And that's why the silkworm dies inside that cocoon, or he lives or he stays inside, he gets stuck inside that cocoon. And this is what Prahlad Maharaj says is like the situation of an attached householder. That he comes inside, he enters the family life, but he does not know how to get out of it. Or he has not been trained up in the way to control his mind and senses and how to get out. For a person who is trained up, even for him it is difficult. But at least he knows, or at least he endeavors, or he makes plans how to get out of this. But for such a person who is not trained up, who is completely attached, then he is like this silkworm who weaves the cocoon, but then gets stuck inside it. He does not know how to come out. And finally, he says, or finally describes the two aspects, that even after understanding all this, even after knowing all this, why does a person still enters household life? And he speaks about two things which are very, very dear to the person, or to satisfy basically these two senses. And what are those? Those are tongue and genitals. Or he says, Opasthaya jaivam bahu manyamana katham virajeta duranta moha. As in our prasadam prayers also he says, Sharira vidya jal jadindriya tahe kal jive phale vishay sagare tar madhye jiva ati. That among all the senses, we have been thrown in this ocean of sense objects, and among all our senses, naturally all the senses are uncontrolled. And among all the senses, the jiva or the tongue is the most uncontrolled, or most voracious sense that is there. And same thing Prahlad Maharaj says, just for the satisfaction of these two senses, that is for the tongue and that is for the genitals, one becomes bound. Even after knowing all this, everyone knows all these things, or this is a general thing that even without the Bhagavatam, a person understands by seeing that this is how family life is, or this is how much trouble is there in family life. But still, the person wants to satisfy his senses. Tongue by the sweet food, or the food that is delicious food that is cooked in the house. And the genital, as Prabhupada explains, the wife satisfies the husband in various ways. And just for this person, a person becomes bound and he cannot get out of it. So now, further, Prahlad Maharaj speaks something very interesting, or now he speaks about that what happens to such a person. He says, Kutumba poshaya viyan nijayur na buddhyate artham vihatam pramatta sarvatta tapatraya dukkhitatma nirvidyate na swa kutumba rama. So he says that for such a person who is engaged in kutumba poshaya, kutumba is the family life. Poshaya means maintaining the family life, or poshan, as we say, the protection. One of the things of Bhagavatam is poshan, that how the Lord gives protection. But here this term that is used, poshaya, means a person who maintains the family life, who takes care of the family life. So what happens to such a person who is too much attached, who is taking care of the family life very, very diligently? He doesn't understand Viyan Nija Ayur na buddhyate. Nija Ayur means his life, or how his life is getting passed away slowly, how he's going closer to death. He doesn't understand that. He thinks he's very busy, he has so many things to do to take care of his family, but he's not understanding that he's losing his valuable time, or his life is going more and more, he's going more and more closer to death. And then what happens, even in all this process, when he's taking care of his family, when he's working very hard to protect, take care, maintain the kutumba, sarvatra tapatare dukhitatma. Even in these activities, he understands or he undergoes tapatraya. Tapatraya means the threefold miseries. That when he's trying to take care of his family life, when he's working hard, working very, very hard, then also tapatraya, the different kinds of miseries are coming in his life. He's undergoing adi bhautik miseries, adi vyautik kleshas, adhyatmik kleshas, adi daivik kleshas. But still, even after all this, one person, the illusion is so strong that he's not able to give it up. Prahlad Maharaj speaks about this. He says, Nirvadyate na swa kutumba rama. That attached person or the person who is attached is so foolish in this material existence that even after seeing all this, even after seeing the dangers, even after seeing the miseries in family life, such a person still develops some taste or still has some attachment to this and he's not able to give it up. And that is seen many times. People say so many things that I am undergoing so much, I want to give it up and all. But when they are actually asked, okay, you give it up, then they are not able to do that. Because still they have some taste for that attachment, still they have some affection for all those people, and he's ready to undergo all that troubles just to take care of them. And whatever we discuss, this theme is common in the Srimad Bhagavatam throughout. We know the teachings of Rahugana and Jar Bharat, how Jar Bharat gave the teachings to Rahugana. And there he describes even more vividly about this family life, and he compares the different members to the different species of animals. And that's how there also very, very vividly he discusses about this attachment. So one thing that is very, very clear is, or in the Prahlad Maharaj teachings, one thing we can understand from this is that how even after a person undergoes all these miseries, he goes through all this, but there is no distaste or there is no there's no detachment that develops in him. Sometimes a person says that no, a person should go through all this so that he'll naturally develop detachment from it, and then he'll be able to have a nice renunciation. He can practice devotional service nicely. But here Prahlad Maharaj, especially this verse which says Nirvidyate na swatam sa kutumba rama, which says that a person does not develop any distaste or any detachment. He goes through miseries, he goes through all that, but still he has affection. Just like Prabhupada gives the example of a camel. When a camel eats those thorns and the camel starts bleeding because of that, but still it keeps on enjoying that thorn, enjoying its own taste of its own blood. And same way for a person who is undergoing all those miseries, engaging in family life, but still he does not develop any kind of detachment from them. And now we see in Bhagavatam also, there was one personality who made that dialogue, who said something similar, who said that a person should actually enter family life, then with time when he engages in family life, when he undergoes miseries, then he'll realize and then renunciation will come upon him. But here we see Prahlad Maharaj is refuting that philosophy. So who was that personality who said like that? We see Daksha, he said like that. When Daksha's 1,000 sons, they took to the path of renunciation, or they were actually brahmacharis right from birth, they were practicing brahmacharya, and then later on they took to that path of renunciation. And then again those 10,000 sons also, I think the names were Heya, Shavaz and something was there. Those 10,000 sons also took to the path of renunciation. That time Daksha was cursing Narad Muni that you made them immaturely renounce all these things. They were not eligible for all this. They should have entered family life. They should have gone through all the experience, and then naturally renunciation would have dawned upon them. That was Daksha's philosophy, and here we see Prahlad Maharaj is refuting that philosophy. He's saying that this is not possible. This is not going to happen. Yeah, and this is quite visible even in the case of Ajamil himself. How he was living such a worst life, such a wretched life, but he didn't develop any kind of detachment altogether, even at the end. Of course, he attained the highest destination because he was blessed, or he had this good fortune because of naming his son Narayan, which is the later part of this verse that is described. So one thing we understand, or one thing we can understand from all this discussion, what we discussed till now, that even for a person who is aspiring to break the cycle of birth and death, or who is aspiring to go back to Godhead, who is aspiring to serve the Lord, then for such a person it is very, very necessary to be free from attachment. Or specifically here we are talking of the Baddha Hridaya, or the material attachment which bounds the heart. And it's very, very important for such a person who is aspiring to break the cycle of birth and death to get out of this material attachment that is there. And Prabhupada writes something very interesting. He says, to return home back to Godhead, one must be free from material attachment. And he says, therefore, Bhakti Yoga means Vairagya Vidya, the art that can help one develop a distaste for material enjoyment. So the entire practice of Bhakti Yoga we are doing, the entire practice of devotional service is aimed at just this one aspect. And that is the aspect of developing detachment from these material things that are there, developing distaste for material enjoyment that is there. This Vairagya Vidya, this is a famous shloka that was quoted by Sarvabhaum Bhattacharya. When he was glorifying Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was speaking about that, what is the thing that Mahaprabhu gave to us, or what did he came to teach us? And he speaks this, Vairagya Vidya, Nija Bhakti Yoga, Shikshartham Eka, Purusha Purana, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Shariradhari, Kripam Buddhir Yastam Aham Prapadya. So what he says is that what was the reason of descent of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? And he came to teach us this Vidya. And what is that Vidya? That is the Vairagya Vidya, or being detached from these material things or the material enjoyment that is there. And what else? Vairagya Vidya. And apart from Vairagya Vidya, what else? Nija Bhakti Yoga. One is detachment from material things, at the same time attachment to his own devotional service, Nija Bhakti Yoga. Shikshartham Eka Purusha Purana. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is glorifying the Lord that he is the oldest person, he is the supreme person, and he came just to teach these two things. Or he came just for this aspect, to give this transcendental mercy, to teach these aspects to all the living entities. And that's why it's mentioned, or that's why it says, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Sharir Dhari, Kripam Buddhir Yastam Aham Prapadya. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is saying that he is surrendering to the Lord who came to teach these two aspects. So one thing we understand here is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught us, or he taught us this process of surrender, or he taught us that how by engaging in the service of the Lord, or how by being Vairagya, by being detached from everything material and by being attached to the service of the Lord, then the person can actually make advancement in spiritual life. Even the Diksha process we speak about, the Diksha that happens, or the Pancharatrika Diksha that we speak about, so it's very nicely described that process is, the Diksha is the entire process of surrender. And this is not something new. So it was very nice. I was reading this aspect that it's not something new that was introduced by someone. It has always been there. Even the Sri Sampradaya, it's described that even Ramanacharya introduced this aspect of Pancharatrika Diksha. And what is this all about? Why this was introduced first of all? Because in the past it was described that there used to be this Vedic Diksha that was there, or the Diksha, the initiation that was given based on the lineage, or based on the person's birth, based on in which family he is born. And he was given entitlement to certain things. But then with time, as the Kali Yuga was progressing, that things were degrading more and more. People born in different families, they didn't have the qualities of those. Or they didn't have those kind of qualities. Wherever there were people who were born in low families, but they showed qualities of such things, or they showed the higher qualities of higher varnas that were there. And that's why this was introduced even by Ramanacharya in the Sri Sampradaya, this aspect of Pancharatrika Diksha, just to give every personality or everyone a chance to engage in devotional service. And the important aspect in this Diksha, the more in focus, is the process of the 6 limbs of surrender that are there. That this Diksha happens or begins with the process of surrender. That when a person surrenders to the Supreme Lord, surrenders to the spiritual master with those 6 limbs, then the actual connection, then the actual Diksha happens. Even in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself says, Diksha kale bhakta kare atma samarpan. Where he speaks about that this entire, what we speak about Pancharatrika Diksha, is all based on this process of surrender. And when a person surrenders to the Lord and surrenders or follows all these angas of accepting the Lord as the only protector, accepting things which are favorable, giving up things which are unfavorable, naturally with time he develops vairagya, or naturally with time he develops detachment from all the material things, and his attachment towards the Lord increases. Or his attachment towards the different paraphernalia, different name, fame, form of the Lord increases. So now another aspect, so here we are discussing about this aspect of attachment, and we discussed about the different expansions of the family life to which a person becomes attached. And then we speak that how the person has to dovetail that attachment to the Supreme Lord, or dovetail that surrender towards the Supreme Lord, and then develop attachment towards the different things paraphernalia related to the Supreme Lord, and try to become detached from the family aspect. So now one more thing, or one more verse, I was just going through this pastimes in the pastimes of Lord Krishna, that even similar attachment was there when they were all in Vrindavan. Or when Krishna was young in Vrindavan, even a similar attachment was seen by all the Vrajvasis. They had some attachment towards Krishna and Balram. But that attachment is not condemned. Here we are condemning all these attachment. Here we are condemning the attachment of family life, condemning the attachment of the person towards his son, because the son is speaking in broken language. In the pastime, in the 10th canto also, it's described that when Krishna and Balram were young, they also used to speak in broken language. And because of that, the Vrajvasis were very much attached to them. They also used to struggle to walk, and they also used to speak in broken language. And because of that reason, all the Vrajvasis were attached to them. But one interesting thing is that time, though, that attachment is not condemned. Or it's nowhere said that that attachment was wrong attachment, or that should not be there. This shloka, it says, Evam Vrajokasam Pritim Yachanto Bala Cheshtita Kala Vakya Swakalena Vatsa Palo Babhuvatav. What it mentions, Kala Vakya Swakalena. Again, the same thing. Kala Vakya means these Krishna and Balram, when they were young, they used to speak in broken language, and they used to act like small boys doing different things. And this increased the attachment of Rajvasis to them even more. But such attachment is glorified. So here we see one thing that is very important is when we speak about detachment, we are speaking about detachment from all the material things that are there. But then the same attachment, when it's directed towards the Supreme Lord, like these personalities, they were attached towards the Supreme Lord, that is not condemned. Rather, that is glorified even further, or that is glorified more and more. And that's why it mentioned, they gave transcendental pleasure to all the inhabitants of Raja. That just by these activities, they gave pleasure to inhabitants of Raja, and their prema towards the Lord, or their affection towards the Lord, increased more and more. So now question comes, or the entire aspect comes, then how to develop this attachment towards the Lord, or how to develop this distaste from all these things material that are there, and develop this attachment towards the name, form, and pastimes of the Lord. I think some days back when we were hearing that Prabhupada lecture, he was speaking something similar. And he was giving, or Prabhupada normally gives the example of Yamunacharya. That how he was a king. So Yamunacharya was the spiritual master of Ramanacharya. And he in his previous life, or before becoming a devotee, he's described he was a king. He was a king and he had many princesses. And he was engaged, he was also just engaged, enjoying with them and family life and all those aspects. But then when he gave it all up, when he came into devotional service, of course, I do not know the details of how it all happened. But then when he became a great devotee, that's when he used to condemn all that. And that's when he spoke that shloka, Yad Avadhi Mama Cheta Krishna Prabhadaravende. What is after that? Navanavrasa Dhamno Rantumasit. So there he speaks about that when he engaged in devotional service, or when he engaged his mind in thinking about the lotus feet of the Lord, that time when he used to think of his previous attachment, or how he was a king engaged with different princesses and enjoying and all that thing, that was a time it became distasteful for him, or he didn't used to like that thought, or rather, as it's described, lips curl and distate, and he used to spit at that thought. So that's what happened after he engaged, or after he got into devotional service. And this is what the Bhagavatam also says, that how a person can actually become attached by engaging, or as this shloka says, Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janaiti Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayad Ahetukam. That how a person can develop these aspects of vairagya, or detachment, and also attachment, that comes by engaging in devotional service, or by surrendering to the Lord. When a person practices devotional service, or engages in different limbs of devotional service, then naturally these two results are seen. That is Vairagyam and Jnanam Chayad Ahetukam. And how much time it takes? This shloka says, Janaiti Ashu Vairagya. Ashu means very soon. that this happens very, very soon when a person engages in these aspects. And when we are speaking of jnana here, or when we are speaking of vairagya and jnana that is developed, so here we are not talking of the ordinary jnana, or here we are not talking of jnana in terms of what the jnanis speak about jnana. Rather, our acharyas explain that this jnana we are speaking about the knowledge of the Lord's name, form, pastimes, and qualities. So naturally, a person develops detachment from material things, but he develops more and more knowledge or attachment to the name, form, and qualities of the Lord. That's what happens when a person engages in devotional service, and that's how a person becomes completely satisfied. And that is why we have this personality from Bhagavatam, again from Bhagavatam, who was at one point in his life, he was a king, he was engaged in family life. But because he engaged in devotional service, he engaged all his limbs in the service of the Lord. He was not at all affected with all these things, or he was not at all affected by the family life. And at a later point of time, it's described that he gave up, even though there was no need, but still he gave up that family life and entered the Vanaprastha ashram. And that was Amrish Maharaj. So these are the few beautiful shlokas. Maybe we can recite together if anyone remembers. That how Amrish Maharaj, he engaged in senses, in all his senses in the service of the Lord. So that says, Savai mana Krishna padara vindayor. Vacham si Vaikuntha gunanu varnane. Karo harer mandir marjanadishu. Shutum chakara achyuta satkathodaye. Mukunda lingalaye darshane drishau. Tadbritya gatra sparshe anga sangamam. Granam cha tatpad saroj saurabhe. Srimat tulasya rasanam tadarpite. Padav hare kshetra padanu sarpane. Shiro rishikesha padabhivandane. Kamam cha dasya natu kama kamyaya. Yatottama ashloka janashraya ratihi. So here it's described about this great personality, Amrish Maharaj. Even though he was in the family life, or he was also entangled, he was not just in family life, he was the king, he was a Kshatriya, the ruler of the entire planet. And he also had wife, he also had children, and all the opulences was there. But still he was not at all attached, and the reason is because he engaged all his senses in the service of the Lord. And here these shlokas, this series of shlokas describe that how all his different senses, Savai Mana Krishna Padara, that how his mind was engaged in thinking about the lotus feet of the Lord, how his lips or his tongue was engaged in glorifying about the different activities, pastimes of the Lord. Shutim Chakara Achyuta Satkatode, Shutim, how he was hearing, or his ears were engaged in hearing the glories and pastimes of the Lord. Legs were engaged in going to the temple of the Lord, and same way all the different activities were just engaged in devotional service. And at one point it's mentioned that even though he was the king, he was ruling the kingdom, but he used to be completely engaged in devotional service, and Sudarshan used to take care of the kingdom, it seems. So the Lord personally sent the Sudarshan just to take care of the entire kingdom. So that was the level of devotional service he had. Even though he was a king, he was engaged in all these things, he had a family, but he was constantly engaged in devotional service, and that's why he didn't get entangled. And the most important thing is that even after all this, we know the glories of Amrish Maharaj. We have heard so many glories. We heard the pastime of Durvasa Muni also. That how when Durvasa Muni offended him, Sudarshan Chakra personally came to protect Amrish Maharaj. But even such a great devotee, or such a great personality who was already on the highest platform of devotional service, he also did something it's described in the Bhagavatam at the end of his life, or at the later point in his life. He also took to the next ashram. He also gave up the entire kingdom. He also gave up his family life just to go to the Vanaprastha ashram and engage in devotional service. Of course, the question may be asked, he was already engaged, then what was the need of it? But we can understand, just to set an example for others, he did this, and Bhagavatam describes, Evam vidhaneka gunasa raja paratmani brahmani vasudeva kriya kalape samavaha bhaktim yava virinchayam nirayam shakara. It's mentioned, this shloka is very, very amazing, which speaks about that evam vidhanika guna sa raja. Because of his devotional service, because of his pure devotional service towards the Lord, he was endowed with many, many amazing qualities. We understand a person who develops in devotional service, naturally all the good qualities of the demigods manifest in him. And Mamrish Maharaj was one such character who manifested so many wonderful qualities because of his devotional service towards the Lord. But one point that is mentioned is Kriya Kalape Samuvaha Bhaktim Yava Virinchayam Niryam Shakara. It's mentioned because of his devotion, he thought even the topmost planet of this material world no better than the hellish planets. That he was such a great devotee that he had no desire in this world to enjoy whatsoever. Not just in the earthly planet, he had no desire to go to the higher planets, he had no desire to go to the hellish planets. Because he was such a great devotee, he thought this is all hellish or this is all not worth it. And that's why it's described, and that's why Shukdev Goswami describes. Thereafter, because of his advanced position in devotional life, Maharaj Amrish, who no longer desired to live with material things, retired from active family life. He divided his property among his sons who were equally as qualified, and he took himself the order of Vanaprastha and went to the forest to concentrate his mind fully upon Lord Vasudeva. So it's described that how Maharaj Amrish, even though he was such a great personality, engaging all his senses in the service of the Lord, but at one moment of his time or at one point in his life, he took the Vanaprastha ashram, divided all his property among his family members just to engage or just to concentrate his mind upon Lord Vasudeva. So from this example, it's very, very clear, not just many other examples. The example of Bharat Maharaj we have, how he gave up everything and he was not at all bothered. It's described that how he gave it just like a person gives up stool. So same way that aspect that is mentioned, though, that is focused in Bhagavatam, that whomever it may be, a person on a very, very high level of devotional service or a person who is practicing devotional service, this thing or the household life is very, very entangling. And this is what is visible in the case of Ajamil. And how a person at one or the other point of time, he has to plan to quit this family life and engage in full-time devotional service. And of course, as Prabhupada recommends, there is no need as such of entering household life. That's what Prabhupada writes for a person who wants to make advancement in devotional life. But for one who is attached and who cannot live without it, then he has to practice some regulations, and at one point he has to plan how he can quit this family life. And that's how the person can actually get away or get rid of this attachment that bounds the heart. And finally, as Prabhupada writes in this current purport under discussion, he glorifies the aspect of chanting the names of the Lord. Or he speaks about that although Ajamil, he was chanting his names again and again of his small child, but then even though he was chanting his, calling out the names of his name of his son, but that was so potent or that was so powerful that cleared all the sinful stock he had or all the sinful reactions of the sinful activities he had done. And that's why Prabhupada writes that the name of Narayan is so powerful that even by chanting his son's name, he was becoming purified. Srila Rupa Goswami has therefore declared that if one's mind is somehow or the other attracted by the holy name of Krishna, one is on the path of liberation. So this is something which Prabhupada writes, a very, very practical aspect which our acharyas have given. That some way or the other, because a person might think that, okay, I am also falling in this category which is given in the Bhagavatam, which is described by Prahlad Maharaj or which is described by all these personalities, that a person is so, I'm also entangled in all these aspects. Then the entire aspect of the entire solution, as Prabhupada writes, is somehow or the other person has to become attached to devotional service. Somehow or the other, he has to become either to chanting the names of the Lord or to engaging in different services for the pleasure of the Lord. Because if he develops some attachment, if he develops even some spiritual attachment, and he begins his devotional service, that devotional service itself will purify him and he'll be able to advance more and more. As Rupa Goswami himself says that if a person's mind is somehow or the other attracted to the holy name of Krishna, one makes progress on the path of liberation. Even though he may be attached to many other things at the same time, but if he aspires to develop some attachment, if he endeavors for that, and with time if he develops attachment to the holy name, if he develops, that's the greatest thing. But even to any aspect of devotional service, if he develops some attachment, naturally his attachment will increase more and more and he'll get detached from other things that are there. And that's why Prabhupada writes a general thing that was there customary in the Vedic times, we can say, where the people, or where it was a natural tradition of people to name their sons Krishna Das, Govinda Das, Narayan Das, where a person naturally used to call out the name of the Lord. Of course, these things are even seen now. Now also, these names are there, but they're in front of wine shops, Krishna Balaji wines and or whatever wines and so on and so forth. So chances even there to chant the names of the Lord and the person to actually become purified. But of course, if after understanding everything, he does it in a proper way, naturally he can make more and more advancement. So these were the things, different aspects that were there of a person, how a person becomes attached to various aspects of the family life, various expansions of the family life. And the only way to get out of this attachment or get out of this entanglement is by engaging in devotional service, by engaging in senses in some or the other way, some of the other activities of devotional service. And even if he develops a little bit of attachment to any anga of devotional service, then his liberation or his path of liberation becomes start, or his path becomes open for going to the path of liberation. So thank you very much. We'll pause here. Hare Krishna. Yeah. Any questions?